Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. It's show number 215. It's Wednesday, the 16th of February. Winter is finally starting to come to an end. It's a lovely sunny morning here in London at the moment, but that is following several days of monsoon-like weather. There's actually a big lake in the middle of my garden right this moment. Right, so I've got quite a lot to cover today's show. The news is a bit thin, but I'm coming back to the Highway Code Rule H2. That's the one about giving way to pedestrians waiting to turn. And I'll be talking about some of the comments that people have made on that over the last few weeks, as well as some pushback from people who don't agree with my assessment. So we'll come back to that. That'll be at the end of the show, so stay tuned for that. Meanwhile, in news stories, we've got Tehran's move to curb women motorcyclists. A teen involved in a collision gets a 1p fine from Peterborough magistrates. We'll ask if lithium-sulphur batteries are the big EV breakthrough that some reports are suggesting. And a new 24-hour endurance record has been set in India by Harley Davidson, of all people. The Royal Enfield 650, it looks like a new tourer version of that has been spied on test. And we'll also look at a short video which explains why you shouldn't get off an auto scooter with the engine still running. Before we finish off, as I say, by looking at the Rule H2 from the new Highway Code guidance. So stay put for the next 30 odd minutes. Don't forget, if you have anything to say, comments, questions, I will try to get back to you during the show if I possibly can. If I can't make it during the show, it'll be at the end of the show when I sum up the topics. Don't forget, if you can't make it live, you can also catch it over on my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK. So those are your reminders. We have one person looking in. Kevin's looked in. Good morning, Kevin. Nice to see you. Let's just start off once again with a quick reminder about the March live webinar event. It'll be on group riding. As I said, warmer weather is just around the corner. It's quite a mild day today, and the evenings are starting to stretch out again. The clocks do their thing in just a couple of weeks' time, so the ride out season is getting underway. And as I said before, biking with buddies can be great fun. The CompuServe riders in front of you on the photo there, I had some fantastic rides with them, but I have to admit I've also been on a few rides which have been less than well disciplined, and it ends up being hard work and not particularly enjoyable in my opinion. So I'll explain how, if you're organizing a ride, you can do it to avoid trouble, and how if you're joining a ride, you can do your best to stay out of trouble too. So Alex has also looked in. Good to see you both. Right, so don't forget the Highway Code H2 rule assessment follows. But meanwhile, let's get on with today's news. Now, if you listen to some riders talking, you'd think there was some kind of stealth diktat to legislate motorcycles off the roads. Well, all I can say is thank your lucky stars that you are neither female nor living in Iran and trying to ride a motorcycle out there. Because plans are being put in place to, quote, seriously deal with those who have no motorcycle license, which automatically, of course, includes women. Now, Tehran's police chief, Brigadier General Hussein Rahimi, he announced the scheme on Sunday, saying that as of February the 19th, about 100 checkpoints are going to be set up across the city so that no one can ride motorcycles in Tehran without a license. Now, the report I found was on a human rights website, and it says that the plan seems like a pretext to crack down on women who have been increasingly using motorbikes, although it's frowned on by the country's hardliners. The Iran's fundamentalists have repeatedly expressed opposition to women riding bicycles, let alone motorcycles, and under Iranian law, only men can apply for motorcycle licenses. Women basically are not allowed to apply for driving licenses. In 2017, Iranian media reported that two young women had actually been detained in Dezful in southwest Iran after they were filmed riding a motorcycle. So this is a fairly serious problem for women out there in Iran. Meanwhile, if you're a young teenager in Peterborough, you may be surprised at how leniently magistrates might let you off. Local magistrates at the court there have fined one teenager 1 penny for a range of motorcycling offences. Kai Cook, 19, was involved in a collision with another vehicle on September the 6th last year in Chatteris, when he attempted to overtake another vehicle on the approach to a junction whilst riding his Honda motorcycle. Following the incident, he was charged with driving driving otherwise than in accordance with a license, driving without due care and attention, and failing to stop after an accident, which are all pretty serious offences, actually. He pleaded guilty at the hearing, and then magistrates fined Cook just 1 penny, ordering him to pay a victim surcharge of £34 after hearing about his financial circumstances. He also had 8 points put on his presumably non-existent licence. Okay, so yes, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, you can pop over to my coffee page. There's the URL for you. Buy me a coffee over there, which is always good because it helps me keep coming back and making more shows. But you can also access probably the biggest archive of better biking articles anywhere you're likely to find on the internet over there. I've still got the picture of the group riding up. I have no idea. Let's get rid of that. I meant to get rid of that some time ago. Right. So according to a report that's doing the rounds in the press this week, scientists have accidentally stumbled on what's being described as the holy grail of batteries. The stories claim that there's been a breakthrough with lithium-sulphur batteries, which hold the potential to triple the charge capacity for electric vehicles. Now, lithium-sulphur batteries are actually a form of lithium-ion battery, and they're not completely different. And they've been around actually since the 1960s. Now, the good news is that sulphur is, of course, fairly naturally abundant. It's easy to get out of the ground. And the chemical structure actually allows a lithium-sulphur battery to store more energy. But until now, there have been some problems. One is that the battery has actually changed size as it charged and discharged, which of course is a little bit of a problem if you're trying to confine the battery in a particular space. And the second problem was that the sulfur-based cathode seems to have reacted with the battery's carbonate electrolyte, which degrades the cathode and kills the reaction which generates the electricity. Now, it seems that without getting into too much chemistry here, the problem has been overcome by confining the sulfur in what's described as a carbon nanofiber mesh, whereupon something totally unexpected happened. The sulfur itself crystallized in an unexpected way, forming a different structure of the element, a form called monoclinic gamma phase sulfur. Now, if you're probably not a chemist, you're probably a bit lost by all that, but to give you an idea of what the difference is, think about carbon. You probably know that elemental carbon consists or exists in several different forms. Graphite is one, and diamond is another. They're both pure carbon, but they have completely different properties because of their different internal structures, and that's what is happening with sulfur here. Now, in this case, it seems that they've been testing a battery made this way for over a year. And not only has the sulfur cathode remained stable, which they've never been able to manage to achieve before, but really interestingly, the team has reported that its performance, the battery's performance, has not actually degraded in 4,000 charge and discharge cycles, which they say would be equivalent to around 10 years of regular use. You work it out for yourself, 365 days a year, 4,000 charge cycles. And as predicted, the battery's capacity is actually 3 times that of a lithium-ion battery. Now there will be one drawback. The battery will probably be heavier than the standard lithium-ion batteries that are used at the moment. But on the other hand, the use of sulfur does address some of the environmental concerns about the sourcing and disposal of the rare raw metals, materials, the rare earth metals that are used in current lithium-ion batteries. Global sales of EVs have more than doubled over the last year. Prices of the battery materials like lithium, nickel, manganese, and cobalt have surged, and the supply chains for those materials have actually bottlenecked too, partly due to the pandemic, partly due to the fact that there are very few places on Earth that these things are actually dug out of the ground. The Congo and China being two of the main suppliers. So there are some questions that may be answered by lithium-sulfur batteries. But on the other hand, don't get too excited and think this is just around the corner technology. The research team are still working to fully understand the process, and whilst there's definitely hope that the process, the techniques could be commercialized at some point in the future, it's still a way off yet. It's not a reason to put off buying your electric motorcycle expecting this to be a game changer in a month's time. It's not going to happen that way. Right. Okay. So, a more interesting story altogether in some ways for those who like motorcycles is that after the reorganization of the company, the US bike builder Harley Davidson closed their Indian factory where they built up what's known as knocked down kits, basically. The bike was built in America, shipped over in a crate to the Harley Davidson factory in India, and then constructed and sold on the market. But what they did do was they signed a new distribution deal with the Indian two-wheeler giant Hero MotoCorp last October. And to help publicize the link up, Hero have been running a few stunts with Harley Davidsons, including taking a bike to the top of the Himalayas. But they also took a Harley Davidson Sportster onto the track for 24 hours. I do have a picture of that somewhere. I seem to have lost it. Where's it gone? There it is. I've got the pictures out of order. Let's just bring that back up. There we go. So there's the Harley Davidson out on track. They completed a 24-hour endurance run, 5-rider team. They swapped places at regular intervals. Each rider was doing roughly 100 kilometers, 62-mile run. They did 6 of those runs each, apparently. It took 31 pit stops, and on the 1.74 kilometer, which is just over a mile long track, they covered 3,141 kilometers, or 1,952 miles, as near as damn it, on the Sportster S, with an average speed of 130.9 kilometers per hour, which is 81 miles per hour. So each stop included a fuel refill and a rider change, and they changed tires every 1,000 kilometers, roughly 620 miles. So the Hero MotoCorp head of Harley Davidson business, a chap called Ravi Avalur, he said, "We recently took the Harley Davidson Pan American to the highest unpaved motorable road in the world, in Ladakh, I believe that is, and that inspired us to do something uniquely different with the new Harley Davidson Sportster S. It's a strong testament to the quality of this Harley Davidson motorcycle to have successfully endured the test and gone further than any other motorcycle in the country in 24 hours. Personally, I'd say that it's actually a fairly strong testament to the endurance of the riders too. That riding position looks pretty damn uncomfortable to me, with sort of that forward lean with the forward pegs at the same time. I'm not sure I want to be riding that bike for hours at a time, but hey ho, I know that there are plenty of Harley Davidson fans out there. I'm more than happy to hear from any of you to tell me that I'm wrong and you can sit comfortably on one of those bikes. Another Indian brand that we've been hearing a lot about recently is Royal Enfield, of course, and I've reported in recent shows on their booming sales in the 350 and 650 categories. The Meteor has been doing extremely well, and so have the Interceptor, and it's the Continental GT, isn't it? So where are they going next? Well, rumours have been circulating for some considerable time that there will be a cruiser based on the 650cc twin engine. And that it could appear in the not too distant future. It's even got a name. It's alleged to be called the Shotgun 650, and the bike is said to feature trademark cruiser style wide handlebars and the forward set foot pegs, the same sort of thing you'd seen on that Harley there. So 47 PS horsepower and 52 Newton meters of torque. the same as the other twins. It should be a nice lazy ride. Um, but back in the 2018, when Royal Enfield were just about to launch the 650 Twins, one of the things that they did claim was that there was no plans to launch a version of the successful Himalayan. That's the sort of adventure bike with the 410cc engine with the 650 motor in it in the short term. In the short term obviously means that longer term it could happen. So it's a project that many expect to see the light of day. And basically, the frame might need to be reinforced, but the bike would theoretically be equipped with sort of 21-inch and 18-inch wire rims. And appropriate off-road tyres, and probably, well, a definitely uprated suspension too. And press speculation suggested the bike would also come with the now obligatory luggage system. Now, um, there have been some snapped pics going around on the internet at the moment. I won't show them to you because they are copyrighted. But they basically show what's said to be a touring version of the 650 Twin, complete with big square aluminium side cases on several of the bikes, or one of the bikes, and a more rounded aluminium cases on another bike. They're all fitted with a black top box, which appears to be made of black plastic. The side cases, the square side cases, look like the ones already sold with the Himalayan. The snap pics do suggest an upright and relaxed riding position for the rider. One bike was subtly different. It did have as well as a set of luggage, oddly enough, the rounded luggage, it also sported a windscreen, big chrome crash bars, and auxiliary lights mounted to the top edges of the crash bars, as well as alloy wheels instead of spokes. So there are some elements there which suggested that could be either a sort of Tourer GT, or it could be the basis of the adventure bike. So who knows what's happening, but with the current development trend for building motorcycles around a particular platform, the chassis and engine, and the I think lack of investment in new engines with the imminent arrival of electric bikes, I think it's not entirely unlikely that we'll see both a tourer and adventure bike model from Royal Enfield in the very very near future. And I wouldn't count out that cruiser either. Right. Now, every now and again, I do see something completely daft happen. So just have a quick watch of this video, which I clipped from News Flare. Let me just find it. You'll see what happens. Hopefully, nobody was seriously hurt. There was no report on the incident other than the barest facts of the video. This happened in Paris. Right, okay, so basically you can see what happened. The lights were red at this pedestrian crossing, and for some reason the rider actually got off his scooter, apparently checking something on his front wheel, forgetting that the automatic transmission means the bike will move as soon as the brakes are released, and mowing down the unfortunate pedestrians in the process, of course. So, basic sensible thinking would be that you don't get off at a auto without turning the engine off first. And better yet, if you're going to check something on the bike, don't try to do it whilst holding it upright in the middle of the road. Move over to the side of the road, turn the engine off, and get it up on the stand. Then you can look at whatever you need to do. How do I know that? Yes, I have managed to drop a bike, climbing off the bike to see if I had a flat rear tyre. And while I was bending down on one knee, the bike fell in the other direction away from me. Fortunately, it was only my little 250, and it landed on the sort of plastic pannier that I had hanging off the side, so no damage done. But But one thing I did notice, and you might have noticed for yourself, there's a worrying lack of action from the people who are milling around those pedestrians who've hit the deck. So if you're not sure what to do in an incident like this, I really would recommend that you get yourself on a free bike safe course. They cost you nought. They are run by the fire services. You'll find them in numerous parts of the country right now. They are resuming after COVID lockdowns, and whilst they sadly don't cover science of being seen anymore, I do know that there is a natty new video that's gone out with them. So if you want to see the original, it was on MCN's news pages, and that links you off to the News Flare site. So there's the full original unedited video, should you want to go and see it. Right. Okay. So that really seems like a good way to lead me into my concluding piece today. So I come back to the highway code changes. Now seems like as good a time as any. The first thing I'll say is I haven't done a lot of riding or driving over the last 3 weeks, so I can't give you a particularly valid personal assessment of whether there's been a great deal of change in the behaviour of pedestrians or cyclists. And I haven't seen many reports of accidents either. The stories that circulated at the time, you'll recall, were kind of largely shock horror predictions in the tabloids. Though I will say that there are one or two in some of the other papers which were of the what problem kind. There was one written in The Guardian by a cyclist who really did dismiss the issues. The um, What I can honestly say, though, is that I've seen virtually no objective and balanced assessments of how the new rules will operate. One notable exception being the black belt barrister, who has a well-known YouTube channel. Now, in a video from the 3rd of February, I meant to get the link for this and I forgot to do it. I'll dig it out for you later and post it up. He recounts a near miss that he saw where he was actually in his car, and what happened was a woman was waiting to turn out of a side road, and she stopped and waved a group of teenagers across the road. And he said whether that was because she was being polite or whether she was aware of the new rules, he has no way of knowing. But whatever, they began to cross the road at the same moment as another vehicle began turning left into the road. They kept crossing, the vehicle kept going, and there was nearly a collision. And after the collision, there was a little bit of shouting apparently from the pedestrians about them having right of way. Now, as he says, there's no knowing why the turning driver didn't give way till the last second either. But the points he makes is, and he says, to quote, if these changes are going to work, then there needs to be a huge awareness campaign, and it shouldn't be relying on channels like mine to communicate these changes to all you guys watching. And I agree. And I think what's utterly appalling is that as someone who has signed up for information as a driver, rider, trainer, I finally got an email from the DVSA telling me how driving examiners would be interpreting the new DVSA rules just a day or two before they were due to be implemented. And that is utterly unacceptable, because it means, if you think about it, that car and bike trainers and HGV trainers and LGV trainers and anybody else who's training people to ride have started training courses which will have a test scheduled after the new rules have come in, but without any clear instruction on how those trainers were supposed to be communicating the changes to their candidates. That is utterly awful. And frankly, the failure spreads to the wider public. Surveys have suggested immediately before the rules came in that 60% of people didn't actually know that the rules were about to be changed. And the amount of debate that's going on, almost a month after I began my series on these changes, is quite remarkable. The post on the H2 pedestrian rule change, the one that has created most discussion, it's actually reached over 17,400 people, which is a lot for my page. I generally get, I don't know, probably 3, 4, 5, 6,000, maybe 10,000 for a good a good post. But this one's done, as I say, 17,000 plus. It's attracted almost 500 likes, comments, and shares, which is also way above normal, and has kept me fairly busy actually reading and responding to them. Now, of course, not all the response has been positive, but I think the scale of the negative response has been informative. 8 people hid the specific post. 13 people have hidden all content from my page. So of the 17,500 people who've actually seen it, that's 21. My maths may bear correction, but having done that very quickly in my head, I make that 0.15%, roughly speaking, of all the people it reached gave me a negative feedback by booting my page from their Facebook. So presumably, of the other 99.85%, many didn't care one way or the other. It just appeared, and they just glanced at it and thought, yeah, whatever, and moved on to the next fluffy kitten. Um, but there were plenty of interactions. Now, some tried to turn it into a political argument about the government's trying to ban vehicles and get motorcyclists off the road and all that kind of stuff. But I have to admit, I politely put those to bed. Quite a few more tried to turn it into a rant about dozy pedestrians, which I either tended to ignore or I hid a few, depending on the level of profanity used in the article. Some were supportive of my point, basically that everyone should look after themselves. And whilst the hierarchy of harm itself is sensible enough, trying to encode a priority that when crossing a road that actually puts the most vulnerable road users into a position where they rely on drivers to take action to avoid them is, I think, daft. Ben, another trainer, said this, quote, "I too am appalled by the rule changes as they're making vulnerable road users more vulnerable, inviting them into situations and assuming right of way, very different to priority, is risky indeed. The cornerstone of all road training, whatever the mode of transport, is observation, anticipation, and planning. And once a risk has been identified, then you plan to avoid or at least minimize the risk." And he went on to finish off to say that he pleads with all vulnerable road users, please recognize your ability to avoid a collision is a much higher calling than being dead right. I couldn't say I disagree with any of that. Paul commented, the enduring memory of my first visit to Berlin is of the number of collisions between cars when a vehicle turning at a junction stopped to allow a pedestrian to cross and was hit by the following vehicle. So there we have a driver trainer. He's actually HGV trainer as well as cars and bikes, I think. His perspective, somebody who's seen the operations of the rules in other countries. Some other people asked made sensible points or asked what I think were sensible questions. Richard observed, and I think this is actually quite relevant, the highway code makes no distinction in regard to the speed limit in place. So turning right in a 20 zone is one thing, very different at 30 or 40 miles per hour. And yeah, that was something I actually talked about when I was talking about turning left off a roundabout. If you're turning left off a roundabout on a dual carriageway, then that could be a 70 mile per hour limit. Yet, according to the highway code, if there is no crossing involved, the pedestrian would have right of way simply by waiting at the pavement, which is barking mad. Another question which came up was I couldn't find an update for how this works when you've entered a yellow hatched box. Stopping in the box waiting to turn right is fine as long as the exit is clear. Does a waiting pedestrian constitute a blocked exit? I've no idea. Yes, you can enter a box junction to turn right as long as there's not traffic queued across the road you're turning into. Queuing in the road you're turning into, and you're only blocked by traffic coming the other way. So, in other words, as soon as there is a gap in the oncoming traffic, you can turn and get clear of the box by going through and into the side road. Well, if there are pedestrians waiting to cross, in theory, you should start that turn and then stop. So what's the rule there? I simply do not know. And as far as I can see, nobody has actually explained that. Um, what about a vehicle that's actually turning left? Once again, you're not supposed to enter the box junction unless your exit is clear. Well, again, what happens if you start to make the turn and then a pedestrian appears on the pavement, obviously wanting to cross, and you stop and give way? Are you then stopping in the box junction? What happens if that's monitored by CCTV? Will somebody be looking at that to see if there's a pedestrian blocking your path? Will you be able to appeal on the grounds that there were no vehicles blocking your path, but there was a pedestrian blocking your path? I simply don't know. I've not seen that scenario discussed anywhere. It's certainly not in the highway code. Naturally, of course, not everybody agreed with my assessment. One suggested it's an easy matter for a pedestrian and a driver to negotiate between themselves as to who goes and who waits. And I said, yes, that's true. In the simplistic diagram which was circulated at the time, which I'll just remind you of if I can find it. Where have I put it? Here it is. Let's get that up. So, yes, in the simple and, as I said, simplistic case there where there is one pedestrian and one car on otherwise deserted roads and pavement, yes, it's easy for the driver to wait. It's easy for the driver to see what the pedestrian's going to do. It's easy for the pedestrian to have a look at the car and decide whether the car driver is stopping and giving way before stepping off and carrying on across the road. But of course, we mentioned the danger of being rear-ended, and that's not the only problem. Have a look at this particular picture. Get the BMW, the Harley out of the way. How are you going to turn through that mob? That's Regent Street in London, and that is a very, very typical street scene. Now you can see that there is a pedestrian control crossing ahead of the pedestrians, but many of the side streets in Regent Street are not lights controlled. You are going to be turning through a crowd of pedestrians. How are you going to tell which pedestrian is going to stop and wait on the pavement and which pedestrian is going to exercise their right under H2 to step into the road and carry on and expect you to give way? I have absolutely no idea. There's far too many pedestrians there to try to double guess what's going on there. Jamie made the same point. He said, I couldn't agree more with what you said. This will be easier to do in a quiet area if you're turning left, but if you're turning right across one or two lanes of traffic, adding cyclists and pedestrians into the mix, it could be a disaster. Okay, but some were not very supportive. Richard, for example, said this is not a new rule, but by any definition that I know, it is a new rule. It's a rule that's been added to the highway code that wasn't there before. That tells me it's a rule, and it tells me it's new. Yes, I would agree that, as you said, rules are guidelines. Yes, they are when they say should, and in this case, it does say driver should give way rather than must. Must means there's a road traffic law behind them. Should means guidance. But the new H2 rule is different because it changes the priority of what happens when the pedestrian is waiting at the curb. It encourages basically the pedestrian to expect the driver to give way. And possibly one of the more critical comments as well came from somebody called Anthony. He said, here we go again, car drivers bleating on about how it's not fair, how they might have to slow down or even stop to allow someone vulnerable to cross, how it will affect them being late to Starbucks or to pick up Tarquin from the nannies. Get a grip. Now, I tried a reasoned response to this. I said, try looking at the situation from the other side of the tin box. No one is suggesting that drivers don't take care around pedestrians, and in fact, I have already specifically pointed out that the highway code has always given pedestrians in the road priority over motor vehicles. And I said, what the new rule fails to consider is what happens in anything but the very simplistic circumstances of the left turn that we saw in that diagram a moment ago. There has been no objective assessment of the problems that vehicle drivers will encounter. What happens when we turn right and someone steps off the pavement directly in front of the vehicle, forcing the driver or rider to give way and come to a halt in the vulnerable position? What happens when there there are numerous pedestrians walking in a constant stream along busy pavement, and just as in that photo from Regent Street. And what about situations where visibility is poor? Let me just zoom in on that picture a little bit. And if you look at it very closely, you will just about make out there is a pedestrian crossing the road just ahead of the bus. You can just, if I zoom in really tight, you can see their feet and their back leg. But the rest of their body is almost completely invisible against the bus. How is a driver supposed to see that pedestrian at night before making a right turn? Um, and the steering group that wrote the rules seems to have completely forgotten how guide dogs are trained to cross the road too. Um, the guide dog will actually wait for a gap in the traffic. So if we stop for a person with a guide dog, dog won't move, will just cause confusion. So what I said to Anthony was try not to be dismissive of other road users' problems. As I said, I'm a pedestrian myself as well as an occasional cyclist, so I try to look at the problem from all directions, not just the one that suits me. But Anthony came back to me and said, I'm also a pedestrian, cyclist, motorcyclist, car driver, and hold a PSV license. I understand there are problems with the new rules, but the main problem I find is that car drivers seem to think they have a God-given right to the roads and everyone else is just an inconvenience to them. This attitude has to change. In the case you state of a car turning right, the pedestrian steps out. The car would have to stop as the pedestrian has priority, as you pointed out, unless in that case it's okay to run them over. And I tried again. I just said basically that, it doesn't make the rules sensible. You can observe what you like about how you believe drivers treat the roads, but it doesn't mean that changing the rules in this way is actually sensible. Yes, as I said, if the pedestrian is in the road, they have priority, and the driver should cede passage to them. I've said that many times. I said it right at the beginning of these articles. I've repeated it numerous times as I've been writing them. But previously, the Highway Code encouraged pedestrians to wait for the road to be clear before crossing. Now, the driver and rider is supposed to give way to the pedestrian even when they are waiting on the pavement. And how do you know when somebody is walking towards a pavement where they're going? Are they going to turn and go down the pavement into the side road? Are they going to wait to cross the main road? Or are they going to stride straight into your path in the side road? I simply don't know how I'm supposed to know that. So the rule change might be fine in small villages and quiet residential streets, but I really don't know how you're going to operate it on a busy road. And frankly, it's not inconveniencing the pedestrian to wait for a car to make the turn, but it is putting the driver and rider, particularly a motorcyclist, at risk if they suddenly have to stop mid-maneuver. A motorcyclist will be leant over as they turn right or turn left, and if a pedestrian suddenly stops and steps in front of them, it's risky putting the brakes on hard to avoid the pedestrian. But you have to basically double guess what's going on. Um, and the difficult situations that I've talked about, the questions that people have asked simply haven't been answered. So what I would say is that as a general principle of designing workable systems, it's always keep them as simple as possible. And the changes here that I see have actually introduced all kinds of if, buts and maybes. Now, most people will be sensible, and evidence so far in my minimal amount of driving, I do expect to be doing a little bit more in the very near future. Um, I have seen people being reasonably sensible, and I don't think it will lead to wholesale carnage that some of the more strident reports have been suggesting. But I don't think these very obvious problems should be understated or simply brushed under the carpet as unreasonable concerns. The answer to me is a balanced assessment of all the issues, not dismissive statements about the failings of other road users, whether they be drivers or pedestrians or cyclists. There are too many casualties on the road. Yes, we can do something about them. Yes. And I have no problem with giving way to pedestrians who are already crossing the road. As I said, it's been enshrined in the Highway Code since it was written 80 years ago. But the change that requires me to second guess a pedestrian on the pavement who may or may not be about to cross the road is, in my opinion, plain daft. All right, okay, that is pretty much it for the day. Kevin has said your humble recollections of rider failures are refreshing. Trust me, Kevin, I've made quite a few in the past. I have a long list somewhere that I've assembled of places that I've fallen off or nearly fallen off. He added, he's shared my H2 article link. Thank you. The more people get to see it, the better, I think. And Alex has said, interesting discussions. Unfortunately, he has to duck out now for a meeting. Well, I hope you come back and enjoy the rest of it on catch up, Alex. Right, that's it for the day. I hope I haven't bored you too much with that little bit of a rant about the H2 rule. So I'll just wind down with a couple of quick reminders. Don't forget the winter gift voucher offer is still open to all to take advantage of. Link is going up now. Don't forget the date for the diary on group riding. Again, the link to book that is here. If you want to come along, that will be first Wednesday in March, the 2nd at 2000 hours, 8 p.m. And I am filling the diary with talks actually for groups and clubs, just actually picking the said diary up. Right now I have one in Uffington in mid-March. I've got another at the end of March in Uxbridge. I'm doing the Shiny Side Up one in New Zealand, unfortunately via Zoom rather than actually locally. I've got an event in Rochester, which I will inform you about towards the end of April. And I've just booked a talk for Ladcock, which is in Cornwall. That'll be at the end of May, and in mid-June I've got another one. Shame I couldn't get these two together because this one is Exminster in Devon. It would have been quite handy if I'd managed to actually put those back to back, but I couldn't do it unfortunately because of the club's commitments. But if you have any connection with a riding club or group, you can book me either for a face-to-face discussion or I will happily set something up on Zoom for you. So do think about that. Right, so that is, I think, everything that I wanted to say today. So once again, thank you very much indeed for tuning in. See you on Sunday, and if you are out there riding today or any day, in fact, take it easy out there and stay shiny side up.